Okay, here we go. Sorry, guys. Give me a second. Apparently, it doesn't like the fact that I put X as a distribution point.
Oh, the letter X.
Yeah.
Hello, welcome to the Real Squabble. I'm Glenn Wolfe here in Seattle, joined today by Dr. Dave Miller in Idaho and Mike Moondog Burnett in a safe house somewhere near Washington, D.C. And before I introduce our topic today, please follow the Real Squabble. Subscribe to our channel in YouTube, like us, and comment. We love trolls.
Yeah, we do.
All right, Election Day is a month away. Americans are going to head to the polls or mail in their ballots like we do in Washington, decide the direction of the country and also the direction of the two main parties. The standard bearer for each of the parties is running on the ticket. The Republican Party is the former president, Donald J. Trump. And while his populist positions resonate with so many, his politics and personality repulse even more, as the Real Clear Politics average shows Trump's favorable, unfavorable at 44.8 favorable to 52.4 unfavorable, or a negative 7.6. Which is even more striking is that he's never actually held a positive rating. He's always had more haters than lovers. Well, I'm not sure he would agree with the lovers part. Anyway, the defections of prominent Republicans from the Trump camp and even Republicans supporting the opposition. This is our topic today. And I can't remember in my short time on the earth defections like this. What I do remember is a party who used to brag about the big tent, and I remember specifically Reagan Democrats. And those people never changed their party affiliation. And this is one of the things that we're seeing today is that people that aren't changing their party affiliation, they're just not supporting Trump. So during this election cycle, we see the opposite, where they're not changing their party affiliation. They're actually in open rebellion, and some even publicly supporting the opposition. And the question
did somebody say Liz Cheney?
Yeah, actually, I wasn't even going to bring up the Cheneys, because I mean they've been vocal critics of Trump pretty much from day one. Yeah. But there are some people who've worked closely with him, and I think that these defections, in my mind, kind of point to some danger signs. So. Mike, you're familiar with Betsy DeVos, former Secretary of Education.
Yeah.
She's not an outspoken critic necessarily of his politics, but she did say that his behavior had grown increasingly erratic and unnerving. That's a short part of her quote, and then she was, of course, the former Secretary of Education. And Cassidy Hutchinson, the former White House aide who served for Mark Meadows during Trump, his temperament wasn't rational.
Yeah.
What are we seeing there? What's going on?
Well, I think a lot of people, when it comes to politics, react emotionally. They kind of it's kind of that way with a lot of things. They believe what they want to believe. They don't necessarily do their homework. If they do a poll, they don't examine the balance of the poll. People, I don't even think, you can find a news channel, honestly, that's not partisan one way or the other.
I would agree with that.
So you go to all these sources without even if I buy something or I make a contract, I go to at least 3 different sources, to try to make sure. I think a lot of times assertions are made out there in public that are not justified. Um, people people who maybe are a little bit smarter are camouflaging their worldviews. Um, anytime an assertion is made, I'd kind of like to see, where you got that statistic again. Maybe you can post it for us about him. About him not having any positive ratings, because I've seen a ton of positive ratings in polls where he's been leading, and I've seen him answer a lot of these questions. And I don't know, I'm not sure where Dr. Miller stands, but there are a lot of things that people on the left don't like about him that conservative voters find positive, right? So his communication style, his bold, unapologetic way of speaking to people. He's never been a polished politician. Does he go? Does sometimes is he sometimes cringeworthy? Yeah, he is. But he had 4 successful years as president, running, as a conservative president, and he certainly emphasizes the. I would certainly emphasize his policies over his personality, just like I would with Dr. Miller. I mean, I don't like Dr. Miller at all, but he's very smart. He's very skilled physician. So I would go to him, but as far as a dinner party, I'm not sure.
Oh, I make a mean New York strip, Mike.
Yeah, do you? Okay.
So I think, I think this whole notion of Trump and his personality being a firebrand is nothing new. I mean, it was that way the first go around. It was that way throughout his presidency. The way he ran things during the height of the COVID pandemic. I mean, as a physician, it kind of drove me nuts most of the time. But at the same time, when you look at where he came down at the end of the day, was trying to do what he felt was best for the country, and to serve the people that elected him. I've always found it interesting that it doesn't get talked about more, that he's the only president in certainly the latter half of the 20th century and the whole 21st century who left office with a lower net worth than he entered. Because the reality is most major politicians, whether it be presidents or the major party leaders in the houses of Congress and Senate, always end up enriching themselves. And yet Trump didn't do that. He refused to take any salary. He used enormous amounts of his own wealth to accomplish various ends that needed accomplishing. And so I think that a lot of that doesn't get enough play. But at the same time, he was leading the country in a very similar fashion to how a CEO would lead a business. And whenever he needed to get something done from the side of industry, he would just simply call industry leaders with whom he had relationships, and it would get done. It's like during COVID when we needed more respirators built. He just simply called some CEOs that he knew and said, "We need you to build respirators," and by golly, they built respirators.
Operation Warp Speed was amazing, wasn't it?
I want to bring up what Fauci actually said about him, and they were very, very not an amicable separation there, and I think that's pretty well known. But Fauci is saying, like, he was getting information from people that, like, he'd be like on the phone with somebody and don't know who he's getting his information from. Let me find my quote here. But it was mind-boggling to me that would actually happen, that you would actually listen to. Oh, here it is. It was clear that he was getting input from people that were calling him up. Like you said, he's talking to industry leaders, right? I don't know who the people he knew from business saying, hey, I heard about this drug. Isn't it great? Or boy, this convalescent plasma is really phenomenal. So here you've got the highest doctor in the nation. I mean, he's got the position of being the highest doctor, and he's not taking advice from the doctor. He's taking advice from people in business. And I think that was a pretty contentious relationship during COVID, if I remember that correctly. Doctor?
Well, I would contest the notion that Tony Fauci was the highest doctor in the nation. I mean, he wasn't Attorney General.
That was his position.
He wasn't the Surgeon General. He was simply the guy that was running the COVID. He was running the NIH, and he was running the pandemic.
Okay.
But again, at the same time, there was that sense as a populist leader that Trump was just kind of, everyone around the country. I was just absolutely mind boggled, and still am at the level of rumor and speculation that was floating around that everyone was buying into. Whether it be, let's deworm ourselves with ivermectin to fight COVID.
Right.
And so a lot of that stuff, I think, was just out there everywhere. And sure, he had Tony Fauci and Deborah Burke right there at his side. But at the same time, how many of us act exactly the same way? I mean, not necessarily me personally, but I have so many patients that come in and talk to me, and I give them sound medical advice. And they're like, yeah, but my cousin's roommate's uncle's best friend saw this on Google.
Yeah, but your client, your patient, isn't running the country.
This is true. I agree.
That person doesn't have a national stage to spout his beliefs. Right. So that, I think, gets to the kind of the crux of it is this personality the kind of personality that is beneficial as a presidential candidate, as a presidential person? It is somebody who's going to be very.
At the end of the day, I would say at the end of the day that yes, he made some really ridiculous remarks, but at the end of the day, the pandemic got handled, things got taken care of, the country was made safe, and things moved down the road.
He was.
So it kind of becomes the proofs in the pudding.
There were a number of things that he was proven correct on in retrospect. His vaccine development with Operation Warp Speed, there were people that weren't going to do it the way he did it. He probably saved millions of people by pushing with his business acumen for Operation Warp Speed, getting those vaccines. And you mentioned the respirators. He was leading getting that out to the world to people. He was in front of trying to get Pfizer on Moderna and people committing and getting all of this made and rolled out even before they knew whether it would work or not. He even before the liberal media agreed with him, he was already saying where the COVID virus had actually come from. And almost everyone now agrees, even Fauci, that it originated in Wuhan. He talked about, he was first on the travel bans, restricting countries, and almost all the Democrats ate him alive for limiting,
right.
limiting.
Called him xenophobic and all these.
Yeah, xenophobic, everything in the world. The economic impact prolonged the lockdowns too. With people.
You had the mayor of Nice, I think, was saying, you need to go out and hug a Chinese person, and of course many of those Chinese people were infected with COVID, and it was just this whole, it can't be a Chinese thing. Well, in point of fact, it was a Chinese thing.
Almost every step of the way, he was called names by the media. He was accused of being xenophobic, of being against everybody. But they accused him of a Muslim ban. The left, the Democrats, falsely accused him of a Muslim ban. They ate him alive for his American First policies, which the president of Italy and a bunch of other countries came in and said, yeah, I think Italy should be first too in our stuff. They ate him alive on foreign relations successes that he had with Israel. My goodness, look at the Abraham Accords and how that worked out and how well he was doing.
So we're getting off topic because what we're trying to talk about is people who are defecting and what the idea is behind the group of people who are defecting from the Republican Party. Yeah. We're not talking about Trump's wins. We're talking about why can't he keep important Republicans in the Republican tent? What's going on there?
Okay, I would say,
but I think when we talk about important Republicans, the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, is hardly an important.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people who are former generals and rear admirals and commandants of the Marine Corps, the Secretary of the Navy, people who've worked closely with this fella.
Yeah.
And are like, no, this guy can't. And I'm not going to just broad brush the strokes of what they're saying, but if they're coming out publicly and saying, I'm not going to support this guy anymore, and I'm a Republican and I'm not going to support him. Yeah. What's going on here?
Well, what I would kind of say, Glenn, is first of all, I would say that probably will always happen in any organization when you have a strong leader with very definite policies. And you have a lot of generals and admirals that just because they're generals and admirals, it doesn't make them the most wise people in the world. And Trump's personality, he ticked a lot of people off and they're fighting back. I'm not saying that's all of it, but I think there's also just the reason I think what you have to understand is, and I can read you a list. There's people that are what's the word you use, that are jumping ship, defecting. I mean, there's probably over the past couple years, there's been more people defecting from the Democrats. I've got dozens of names I could read to you.
Yeah, but those people have switched their party affiliation.
No, not completely. Not completely. Like Joe Manchin, he was getting sick and tired of the way the Democrats were acting. Jim, whatever his name, what's the governor of West Virginia now? Jim something. He was a Democrat and he just got tired of it. Yeah, he switched parties.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are not switching party. I'm not talking about Joe Manchin, who is not a Democrat. He is not a Republican, is an independent.
Right. You know what? I think it comes down to values, Glenn. And sometimes, honestly, and you jump in, Dave, when I hear like you sent us an article that sort of, I'm looking for it now. You sent us an article that sort of kicked off this conversation, and I was looking for so like people like in that article, former, and they're not even current people in politics. That article you sent, like former governor, lieutenant governor Jeff Duncan and Rich Logus. They said, and this is what I can't compute. They said that while they don't align with Harris's policies, they see voting for her as a step forward in rebuilding political unity. And I'm not sure. And there's a list of things that they ascribed to Trump's divisiveness, which related to the area I was going into. That's why I went into, because I thought it related to what you were talking about, where I don't think Trump was divisive on all those issues that I mentioned earlier. And to me, I can't understand when people like Liz Cheney say, yeah, I'm still a Republican conservative, but now
a Reagan Republican,
a Reagan Republican,
which is laughable.
But it's like me saying, I am a Christian, but I hold to all the Islamic, Muslim religious ideals. It's like it doesn't compute, Glenn.
Right. And I think that that's what I think in many cases that is where that's where I would put this as well. That the concept of the rhino, the Republican in name only, has really grown in the last 10, 15 years. And the fact that there are people that have carried a Republican after their name, but don't necessarily align with the core values of the party. And now all of a sudden they're coming out against Trump. That should be hardly surprising. It's a little bit like during the second Trump election when you had, this faction, evangelicals for Biden, and it was all over the issue of, we're going to redefine what pro-life looks like.
Right.
So
they weren't really evangelicals. If you look
they weren't
at
really
it.
evangelicals. They weren't really pro-life because they didn't have a problem with abortion. And they were saying that the whole issue is, why are we going to save all these babies from abortion if we're not going to provide adoption opportunities and stuff, which ignores the fact that there are literally, hundreds of thousands of adoptive parents waiting to adopt children, but they're just simply not available. So, and then they kind of went into end of life care and all this other nonsense. So it's basically a lot of these typical liberal canards just wrapped up with a big R bow on top of it. And then they're saying, we're supporting Trump, or we're supporting the Democrat ideals, even though we claim to be an evangelical and we claim to be a Republican. That's where it doesn't compute, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems, Glenn, like, what I would do more than listening, because, you can listen to assertions from both sides. I'm not just, I am conservative. You can tell from the way, I'm speaking, but, there's nastiness on both sides. I think that the general American public needs to pay closer attention. And when they hear those names of the people I mentioned in that article from the Los Angeles Times story, or, Liz Cheney, who was voted almost immediately out. So that tells you what her state thinks about her. What specifically, when you go to the polls the next time with these people that you're saying are defecting, if I live in a state or a community where they're going to get into office, I'm going to ask, do you support Kamala Harris's semi-socialist ideas for Medicare for all, Green New Deal, decriminalizing border crossings? Why you're defecting because you got your feelings hurt and you don't like Trump's personality? What, to me, it's like, okay, what, you need to get over it.
But if his personality makes him unfit to serve, which is some of the accusation there, then don't we owe it to the country to pay a little bit more attention to, hey, if there's so many people here who've worked closely with him, and we don't have to go to the Republicans, we can go to the people who actually worked for Trump in his first administration. There are people who've worked closely with him who he'll just say are disgruntled former employees, but these are people. His former attorney calls him a cheat, a liar, a fraud, and a bully. You can see the bully part.
Yeah.
But,
well, I think at the same time, you can look at former staffers of any former president, and you can get the same thing.
Yeah, but most of those people don't talk about it. They
talk about it when you put a microphone.
If you have a little bit of
it's a current issue. The reason no one talks about issues they had with Bill Clinton is because he was president, before a lot of these people were even cared about politics. But there are plenty of former staffers that came out and talked about how horrible things were in the Clinton administration, and there are people that didn't like the Bush administration, and so every administration has their detractors that used to be.
Absolutely, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the character of the person, which is what really led me to talk about this. How about Marianne Trump Barry, who says you can't trust him?
Yeah, well,
this is a relative. She was born a Trump, right?
Yeah. Well, the same thing has been said about Tim Walz, and if you start,
this is we're not talking about people aren't defecting from Tim Walz.
Well, no, but at the same time, the sauce for the goose is good for the gander, Glenn. You can't sit back and talk about Trump's character and then disallow discussion about the other side's character. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
you know, you
Kamala
have to have
Harris
a
was
level
known.
playing field in the discussion.
Kamala Harris was known to be dating a married man when she was Attorney General in California.
Right.
So, what does that say to
Okay,
a person's
what do we want to
character?
talk about the sex life of the former president?
No, I
Okay,
don't. But what I'm saying is, if you know, they all have dark spots in
yeah.
their career. So if you only vote on, and almost everyone in history, and by the way, people like Booker T. Washington and Martin Luther King Jr., they were Republicans. There were a number of blacks prior to 1965 that, or after 1965, that were Republicans. There's lots of, what do you call it, anecdotal stuff out there. That's why I'm trying to keep it away from specific character things, because, I look at, there's things that I don't like about Trump. There are a lot of things I don't like about Kamala Harris.
Well, hang on a second. What is it you don't like about Trump?
There's some things that he did that were personality wise that I didn't like. But as I said, I think that policy overrides personality.
Right.
And if you have Kamala Harris, who's, just out there laughing at everything and not really talking specifically about anything, go, isn't she a lovely person bringing joy? It's like, okay, I don't want to joy myself into socialism. I don't want to joy myself into Medicare for all or the Green New Deal. These things, Glenn, everything that she is bringing up, to me, it's like I'm watching what she says, I'm watching what she advocates for, and I'm looking at it and going, that doesn't jive either. And to me, I'm like, why aren't people defecting more from her? Because she's taking us toward $100 trillion to $150 trillion projects over the next 10 years that would just kill innovation, kill stuff for patients. It would virtually turn us into a socialist or communist society. Big government that would have the power to decide that what we're doing here, like you and I and Dave, that this is criminal. Because if we couldn't do this in China, we couldn't.
Well, John Kerry saying the biggest threat to misinformation in the U.S. is this pesky First Amendment. He's saying this on the world stage now.
Yeah. Well, and even Hillary Clinton the other day, and Kamala Harris too. And so we're talking about, I know you're talking about disaffecting, but disaffecting, you're disaffecting for what reasons? That's what I would want to know. What is your what is your worldview? What are your policies? You need to step back and say, what ideas do I support? Not what personality, because do I think that Trump's personality is dangerous to America? No. He has 4 years that he was in administration that there was nothing but good stuff that happened, other than the January 6th, which, has been debated for years now about what he said and what he did and what people believe, and people I respect have different opinions about it. But, I think that it's more than about Kamala's character, which I don't think is very good. It's more than Trump's character, which at times
So hang on a second. If you're gonna call her by her first name, you need to call him by his first name. That's very misogynistic. Call her Harris or call him Donald.
I think even the news media uses that dichotomy.
No, they don't.
Yeah, they do.
That's not fair. Well, if they do, they're doing it wrong. Because I mean, she is Vice President Harris. I'm not here to defend her. I don't agree with almost anything she says.
Right.
You asked before. You asked before if there were things about Trump that we didn't like, and I'll just flat out say I think in many ways Donald Trump is his own worst enemy, because he mouths off. He has this tendency to speak his mind in inconvenient ways at inconvenient times. But at the end of the day, when the chips are down, he tends to get things done. You look at the current war in Ukraine. That didn't happen during his administration. In fact, Russia wasn't doing much in his administration. During the previous administration before him, when Obama and Biden were in office, Putin was running around doing all kinds of things, re-annexing Crimea and whatnot. And then all of a sudden Trump is in office and Russia gets relatively silent. And then as soon as Trump's out of office, now all of a sudden tanks are rolling down the streets of Kyiv. And so to sit back and say that somehow or other his acerbic personality was bad for the country, I mean, we may not like his acerbic personality, but in fact, trade deficits were never lower. The peace on the international stage was never greater. Was literally the first president in modern history to not embroil us in a new war. The current administration keeps trying to say things like that, and yet none of the things they're saying make any sense, because they've had lots of people killed in theater, and they've involved us in Ukraine in some various ways, kind of similar to the run up to World War II in some unsettling ways in my mind.
Yeah. Hey, Glenn, I just looked up an article, and I'll post it on our website. But Vice President Kamala Harris has expressed that she prefers to be called Kamala. This preference is consistent with how she has introduced herself publicly throughout her career. It says she emphasized the correct pronunciation, her name in an interview and speeches, and her name carries significance rooted in her heritage. Kamala means lotus in Sanskrit and reflects her Indian and Jamaican background. So, that's why the media is using it. And I'm not misogynistic. I was only kind of falling in step with how everything I've been hearing. And I listen and read to all the news networks.
Yeah, I want to kind of get back to that letter that you guys have been just so that the people who are viewing this, if they haven't had a chance to look it up, the title of it is the Republican Former National Security Leader's Statement of Support for Vice President Harris. And I'm just going to do the first two paragraphs.
Yeah.
We are former national security and foreign policy officials who served in the administrations of Presidents Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and/or Donald Trump, or as Republican members of Congress. We have served in the White House, the Departments of Defense, Treasury, State, Justice, Homeland Security, Commerce, and other agencies in Congress. We believe that the President of the United States must be a principled, serious, and steady leader who can advance and defend American security and values, strengthen our alliances, and protect our democracy. We expect to disagree with Kamala Harris on many domestic and foreign policy issues, but we believe that she possesses the essential qualities to serve as president, and Donald Trump does not. We therefore support her election to be president. So this again is what they are saying about Donald Trump, is that they don't think he has the personality to be the next leader of
and again, it goes back to this notion of assertions. I mean, they're making these assertions, and yet there's a 4-year track record of
these people were part of that track record.
I understand that, but
they see the inside and behind the veil.
They can't wish that what happened didn't happen, and suddenly it's so. Again, people make these assertions. We can't know what their motivations are, but the fact that they're saying we don't like the guy for whatever reason. Again, this is politics. Politics is a context. Yeah. Always has been.
Some of them that have come out have voiced a lot of policy differences. So, I mean, I have heard between most presidents that a lot of those meetings can get, not just with Trump, but historically, they can become pretty aggressive in those meetings.
Yep.
And I can imagine that Trump, being a billionaire and a businessman, isn't probably as much on a string as some other presidents have been in the past. Some of them, I think, have been so ingrained in, this is the way politics goes, this is the way you should do it. And they take forever, in my mind, and probably in a lot of Americans' minds, on how to get things done. But when it came to trade and foreign policy and immigration and everything like that, Trump broke the mold. He was known in business for getting things done, 100 times faster than everybody else in New York, because former mayors couldn't get it done for 5 or 10 years, and he would get stuff done in 3 to 6 months. And I think he came in there and he ruffled feathers. He would not allow them to wait and draw out projects. He pushed people. He's a New Yorker, and I think that probably rubs a lot of people wrong. Just that style of talking. And I've been around a lot of people like that, and I know the cultural differences. But there's people out there that are loyal to the party, that want it the way it was, and there are people that are loyal to Trump. A lot of people. I mean, even though Biden won, there were more people, Republicans, independents, and blacks and Hispanics and women, that voted for Trump in the last election than ever voted for any Republican in the history of the party. So most people don't think that he's divisive. They like the parts of him that are divisive, because he doesn't just talk. He's a man of action. And I think, there's times, like there's been times when he was in debates. He doesn't prepare and plan thought out ways to talk like Kamala Harris or other politicians who will, say the exact words the same way. And if you get them on a mic, they she's just had nothing but word salad. It's talk about embarrassing. I'm just surprised that more people haven't defected from her, because she can't hardly put a coherent thought together if she doesn't have a teleprompter. Or if she does speak,
Trump has the same problem.
Yeah, sometimes. All presidents do sometimes.
Come on, I mean, he's geriatric. Guy forgets where he is. I mean, I know that when you're on a trail, you forget where you are, because every 20 minutes you're someplace else. But
yeah, I think even Taylor Swift does that. Hey,
yep,
hello, Seattle. Wait a minute, you're in Washington. Portland, yeah.
Wait, Portland. Which Portland am I in?
Right.
Yeah. And then I think again, at the end of the day, so I'm a physician. I hang out with physicians. I train with physicians, and the people I all train, that I all currently work with, are amazing. But there are physicians out there that have massive, huge egos, and the larger the ego, the easier it is to bruise it. And in many of these situations, you've got these people with these high positions of power that are used to being handled in certain ways, and they expect to be handled in certain ways. And Trump flew in the face of that. And when they don't get handled the way they expect to get handled, then egos get bruised. And when egos that large get bruised, then I think this is the sort of thing that you see from that. To me, the more fast, it's interesting when people go down and they talk about this litany of personality flaws with Trump. They always point back to his sexual exploits. The interesting thing is, these are all things that were 20 plus years behind his first administration. There were no sex scandals that came out of the entire Trump administration, which Bill Clinton can't say that. There's lots of presidents that have had that. What's fascinating is that
Kennedy.
Kennedy. what's fascinating is they keep
Doctor,
talking about this, but
let me ask you,
nobody wants to talk about Kamala Harris's checkered past.
Let me ask you about the male ego and the male sexuality at age 70 versus the other presidents at age 55, 45 that we're talking about. Is there a sex drive difference for a 72, 73-year-old man versus a 60-year-old man?
Well, I mean, let's talk about
yes.
Joe Biden leaning in close,
I'm gonna,
and sniffing hair,
personally,
and making yes, very uncomfortable. I mean,
depends. Yeah, it depends on the man.
Yeah, so just because he isn't currently doing silly things like that doesn't necessarily mean you can't erase your past if you've been.
Well, you can't erase your past, but again, let's level the playing field. If we want to talk about Donald Trump's past, then why are we not talking about Kamala Harris's past?
But I didn't bring up the sexuality of.
No, I'm just saying in general, this is how it has played with Trump almost from day one. Is people want to drag out all these things from his distant past, and no one seems to want to do the same sorts of things. It's just like during the so it's just it just gets to be this whole, we just want to find anything we can talk about regarding Donald Trump, but we don't want to apply the same metric to the other people.
Donald Trump used to be a Democrat too,
right?
So he
and historically there is absolutely nothing that the left and the Democrats in particular hate worse than a former Democrat. Look at the Bushes. The Bushes used to be New England liberal Democrats, and then they moved to Texas and married conservative Republican Texas ladies, and they defected and became Republicans. And you can say what you want about how strongly aligned they are with historic Republicanism, but there's nothing that the left in general and the Democrats in particular hate worse than a former Democrat. When Trump was in business in New York, he was the darling of the left, and particularly the black left, because of all the projects he did that benefited the black community. And slowly, we're seeing the black community is actually realigning and coming more to his side, and he's garnering more votes from blacks than any Republican in recent memory. So
and Latinos. I really think people, they just have to constantly refocus, because they can continue to get lost in these red herrings that people drag across the road and go, well, that's the most important issue for me, right? And that's why I'm voting for Kamala Harris, or that's why I'm voting for Donald Trump. It's like, well, you better do a cumulative study as to how you want the country to go, because honestly, if Dr. Miller diagnosed you on one part of something happening to your body, you would eventually maybe die of something you shouldn't have died from. I think that Christians in particular, evangelicals, are willing to forgive him for things, because I think he and pastors that have been around him have talked like he was is a believer, is a baby Christian. They realize that they would not want to be judged for sins they committed 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. I know I wouldn't. They realize that whichever side, Glenda, and I know that you're keeping this on defection is the word, but I think people do defect, like Trump defected from the Democrat Party because the Democrat Party left him. A lot of Democrats.
It was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan defected from the Democrat Party.
Ronald Reagan defected because a lot of people at that time in the South defected from the Democrats because the Democratic Party left them. So what people need to quit, people that we respect in history had adulterous affairs. Martin Luther King Jr., John Kennedy, Donald Trump. I don't know about Obama. One thing I always defend Obama is that I like the fact that he talked to the press, he said what he believed, and he seemed like he loved his family and took good care of them. With Kamala Harris, I just see nothing. I see no substance, but that's what voters have to determine. They need to go there not thinking about Trump or Kamala Harris's personality or the sins they committed the past few years. They should be looking more at, where do you think that Kamala Harris or Donald Trump are going to take us in the next year based on their liberal or conservative principles to protect families, to protect the nation, moral principles, moral compass, their God-given freedoms, including, what bothers me is the way Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton and John Kerry have said they want to censor what they think is misinformation. Really?
What they think is misinformation.
Anything that they think is misinformation, they want censored or banned. And that's going to roll into religious liberty, I have no doubt, because if I say that I believe that homosexuality, the Bible talks about homosexuality as a sin, I just committed a federal crime.
Right.
And do I want that? No, I want to be able to come on here with Glenn and Dave and us to disagree and talk about it and have different opinions and have influence and try to have, like, JD Vance, I thought, spoke well the other night and I liked the way Tim Waltz came across too, for the most part.
Wasn't that a great debate?
It was a very good debate. And
Yeah.
That's what JD Vance said was, no, we don't want to ban speech. We don't want to ban debate. We don't, it should scare every American, whether you're conservative, liberal, independent, whatever you are. It should scare you that Vice President Kamala Harris, former Secretary of State John Kerry, and I think former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said they want to ban what you say. Right? That should scare the living bejesus out of you.
Yeah, in my world, if you look across Europe, the UK in Europe, transgender, gender affirming care in minors has been virtually banned. Why is that? Because they're 10 plus years further down the road than the US. They've seen the harm that this causes. They've seen that nothing good comes from it. And that the right course of action is to help these folks to sort out their gender identity. And then if this persists into adulthood, then in select people, it makes sense to then do something about it. The U.S. has just chose to ignore all that, is plunging forward with gender affirming care in minors, and in multiple states and multiple jurisdictions is actively seeking to censor not only private citizens, but even physicians that hold different opinions. Again, that should frighten us. When all of a sudden politics is ruling out over my medical judgment as a physician, that should frighten us. And
that's where you go from semi-socialist into socialist and into DEI and social justice and areas that have some good but have a lot of frightening aspects of it, to where you do not need the government telling you what to do, when to do it, how to do it. There are certain things that are good, but Lord have mercy. I want the best surgeon. I don't want I don't want equity thrown into surgery. I want equality of opportunity. That's what I want. A lot of people
if we move into Medicare for all, the Medicare system is struggling to keep up as it is. If that gets stretched over the entire populace, all of a sudden now, just like in the UK, just like in Sweden and Denmark and other countries with strong socialist medicine programs, when healthcare becomes a line item, only certain people get certain kinds of care. That's what we're seeing in Canada.
I had a friend of mine.
Canada doesn't have a single socialized medical system. They have individual socialized medical systems in each province. And there are certain provinces where even if you have a diagnosis that could be cancer and it requires advanced imaging to sort that out, you may have to wait months to get that done.
The joke growing up in Montana was that if you got pregnant, you had a 10-month waiting period up north in Alberta to be able to have your baby. So
Absolutely.
So there was a lot of people that come down to Great
that's
Falls
the
and
direction that
Kalispell
Kamala
to
Harris
have.
and others are wanting to take us.
Now,
Yeah.
Glenn, what I would say, I think that there are a lot of liberal-minded Democratic people who have very utopian good hearts, utopia-minded good hearts.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with being utopia-minded is it doesn't take into consideration the human condition. We know that socialism doesn't work. We know that communism doesn't work. A friend of mine just recently in England, we were talking about it. He said, "I'm a socialist, but it doesn't work." It doesn't work. It never has. It destroys people. So, staying on your topic of defecting, I would, there are going to always be people defecting. And we could put it on a scale and see where that lies. And it still wouldn't tell us too much. But, what I would hope, as an influencer doing this show, and you can, certainly put your side of the scale on this, but my part of this would be to hope that people are listening to this would defect from the policies that the Democratic Party currently holds. Not individual people, not Vice President Kamala Harris, but defect from the current policies that the Democratic Party holds, realizing that not everything the Republican Party does is gold, but it is certainly the arrow is pointing in a better direction for me, because I do not equate my Christian values with my conservative values,
Right.
although my Christian values influence my conservative values, and they all influence the way I vote. And there is nothing in that calculus that would have me go into a booth and vote for a Democrat this year. Now, if there was a big switch, that gets talked about, and that could be a whole nother show, between the parties, I would switch. I have relatives that have the word Democrat or Republican tattooed on their butt, and they would not change their ideas no matter what fact you gave them.
Sure.
No facts, no facts.
And those are people that are probably happy you're just not having facts.
A lot of people are. In every aspect of life, we have sheeple. We have sheeple sheeple everywhere. But if anything, I would hope that this show would help teach people. Just think, do your homework. Do not take the word of Fox News. Do not take the word of MSNBC or really anything on NBC. When CNN is actually, because they've lost so many viewers, has actually recalculated some of the things they're doing. And I like the way they handled that first debate. Really, that was the way all debates should be done, in my opinion.
Right.
But don't go in there and quote Fox News and quote all these people. That's why I keep preaching it. My advice for the day is download the Smart News app. You'll get hundreds and hundreds of news feeds from the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the New York Post, the Washington Examiner, everything. And then look at what people are saying. And then we're having this conversation. Well, that's great. They think this. Why do they think that? Does that statement that they made add up? I'm a Republican, but I'm supporting Vice President Kamala Harris because she's going to help to unite the country. That's a logo. That's not that's a logo. Unite the country. You're not going to unite. Go ahead.
Well, uniting versus divisiveness from the left has always been agreeing with us. The solution to divisiveness for the left is just agree with us and we won't be divided anymore. It's just like the scene in the Dennis Quaid Reagan movie where he's talking to Gorbachev and they walk out of the room not having a deal, and Gorbachev's like, I don't know what else I could have done, and Reagan's like, you could have said yes.
Right. We know.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, the solution to divisiveness is not just capitulate and do whatever we say. It's come together and find middle ground, which we haven't really seen much middle ground in politics since the days of Reagan and Mr. Tip. I mean, I would
agree with that. Yeah.
Where we are.
we know that Marxism wouldn't work unless Lenin came into the picture and killed people. We know that that communism or Marxism wouldn't work in China unless Mao killed 30 million people.
Right.
Anytime you force people and you go toward bigger government and you have the government telling you everything you have to do, and even Vice President Kamala Harris said something about coming into your house to make sure that you have the kind of weapons you're supposed to have.
Wait a second. Didn't Donald Trump say that he wanted to become a dictator?
Yeah, but that was taken.
It was tongue in cheek, but I mean,
yeah, it was.
Was it?
But what Kamala Harris said wasn't tongue in cheek. It was concerning her views on gun control.
Right.
But I'm glad that you saw that was tongue in cheek. That could even be a whole nother show, because Donald Trump has an interesting sense of humor, and every time he says something, Donald Trump could say something about McDonald's, and and they would take it, and take it as some, I'm trying to find an analogy, some upside down policy that he believes that everyone should wear red hats. It becomes insane. There are aspects, I will tell you, there are aspects of Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm just going to go along with you, Glenn. That I like that she comes across as being pretty friendly. It almost borders on phoniness, though, as much as she laughs, and carries on, because she laughs and laughs and has fun. And she's like that person at the party who's really fun to be around, but they have no intellectual depth.
Right.
Before we sign out, I wanted to just give a toss out to Jimmy Carter, who just turned 100.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I remember as a preteen, that he used to smile all the time, great big teethy smile, and his advisors told him, "You smile too much; it's a little creepy." So he stopped smiling.
Well, yeah, because it can become, and you can tell that she got a lot of advice before she started debating, and she had some really good scripts written for her. You can tell that because she's locked into a very tight box of things to say and things.
And that's what you're supposed to do in debate prep.
Yeah, but we know a lot. We know a lot about what Kamala Harris has done, but she's not explaining why she's flipped on certain ideas, and I have to.
Even claiming she hasn't flipped.
And even Sanders, she claims she hasn't. And even Sanders came out and said, yeah, of course she's got to say that because she's going to do whatever she needs to do to win.
Right.
And that's, I mean.
Well, and one of the biggest things she's flipped on has been her ethnicity. So you've got Janet Jackson.
Wait a second.
Going, when the heck
she went to a historic black college. How can she flip on her ethnicity?
And why do you have Janet Jackson and other prominent black leaders say, when did this Indian American suddenly become black? Because she's called herself Indian American.
Dave, stop. You're going to make an idiot out of yourself. That is not how black people consider themselves. If you have a black parent, you're black. If you have another parent, you can also identify with that. But if you're black, you're black.
Well,
and I can tell you that because that's my family. My kids identify as black.
I get that, and this is nothing about your family, but my question would be, who made that rule?
It's not a rule; it's an identification,
and that's how people see people.
And that's how my wife out here says that's how people see people. If people see my children as black, that's how they see them.
Yeah, and that's cool. That's
Vice
cool.
President Harris is black. She's a brown-skinned person. And you can be more than one thing, my wife says.
Yeah, sure. And you know what? I'm happy for her. And I know that there are times, I have Jewish blood and I have American Indian blood. And a lot of times if I'm speaking to different people, I'll go, yeah, I am Jewish in a sense. And, but, I identify as being white. And I think that's great. And the one thing that is cringeworthy to me is when people get into identity politics and they only vote for a gender or a race. I
think it's sad as well.
It's sad. It's terribly sad because I would love to see a woman, a black woman, any woman become president of the United States. But the woman or any man or any, if we voted for, a kitty cat, I would want them to have conservative, the conservative values that I had listed earlier in the show. I think that most of the democratic values are at least semi-socialist. And a lot of women out there, I'm not saying everyone, but it cuts both ways. So don't take this wrong. It cuts both ways. There are men out there who will only vote for a man. There are men out there who will only vote for a white man. There are black men who will only vote for someone that's black. There are black women that, since Vice President Kamala Harris is black and a woman, that is their primary reason for voting for Kamala Harris. And I will tell you that is a scary mindset.
Yeah, there's been plenty of white men that got elected just because they had a name that people could identify with.
Like Kennedy.
It's the silly thing. It's
right.
A silly thing in life, right? You can't. That's the cool thing about not having an entry level of an exam to be able to qualify to vote.
Yeah.
If you can vote, if you're the right age, right, you can vote.
Yeah.
You can vote. You can vote. You can vote.
But it is my understanding, and you can ask your wife. I know since she's sitting there. Hey, good morning.
She's in the other room now.
Oh, okay. But there's even I know from Sheldon, who joins our show occasionally. There's debates and arguments between the black community as to who's black and who's really black, and where they're from, whether they're from Jamaica or whether what color of black are they and what kind of black they are, and it gets ridiculous.
It is ridiculous
to even have that conversation, because that shows you the sinful nature of man, in my opinion, because I believe, as the Bible says, we're all one blood, and we should be thinking about what it is we believe and vote as close to. I don't like everything about Donald Trump, but I believe if I'm on a football field, he's going to move me toward the goalpost I want to go toward.
All right. So today we've looked at the Trump defections by those who know him, those who've worked with him, those who've supported him in the past. Well, we have not necessarily agreed with the views expressed by those who have defected from MAGA. We can agree this is not an isolated experience of a few disgruntled ex-employees, and that, taken as a whole, the phenomena of defections is noteworthy. You've been watching The Real Squabble. Please follow us, like us, subscribe to us, and join us again.
Thanks, Glenn.